I was so anxious last year when the season ended, so antsy to already get to year 2. I never really got the chance to enjoy myself. I was already so locked into proving people wrong in my second year. Now I'm going to take a little bit more time for myself, enjoy some time with my family, enjoy some time to relax my mind and my body. Then I will get ready because I'm planning on having a long year next year. I have to take the time now.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast is also brought to you by SeatGeek. Download the mobile app for the easiest way to buy tickets and use the promo code LOFANTASY to get yourself a $20 rebate on your first purchase. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram the same, and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. If you do want to support the show, you can head across to patreon.com/redrock_bball as well and become a supporter of the program over there. Today we're going to look at the Minnesota Timberwolves season, so we're going to talk about that as a season in review. There's going to be two shows today, as I mentioned on yesterday's show. We're going to do the Timberwolves, and then we're going to go straight into the New York Knicks. So you'll see two podcasts come up on your feed today. That'll happen a couple of times this week as we try to make sure we get all the shows done before the NBA draft happens, which is on June the 23rd. So
let's get to it.
We do have a lot of stuff to talk about. So we'll get straight into, actually, let's just get straight into talking about today's sponsor. And that is, of course, SeatGeek. Buying tickets online for sports and concerts has always been a confusing process. But getting that best deal, it's a lot easier now. None of the older ticket sites wanted to change how easy it could become. And SeatGeek has come in, they've done that. They're different. They've created this amazing app and website, making it easier than ever for fans to buy and sell tickets. It's the first place that I go to look for tickets, and recently used it to buy some baseball tickets for when I head across to the States for some games at Wrigley Field in Chicago and in San Francisco at, I believe it's called AT&T Park. I could be wrong there. But going to see the Cubs and the Cardinals, and going to see the Giants and the Indians play when I head across to the States in July. And I got my tickets through SeatGeek. SeatGeek does all the price comparison for you. I got some great seats. And one of the good things about using SeatGeek is when you go onto the app or onto the site, you click the tickets. It tells you whether it's a good ticket or not. Green ticket, good price, good value for that spot. Yellow, intermediate, red, probably want to look somewhere else. But when you click on that ticket, it shows you the view from that seat onto the ground and where you're actually sitting, how it looks, and what sort of view you're going to get. And I thought that was absolutely invaluable when I was choosing what tickets I was going to buy to go and see those events. Best of all, though, listeners to this podcast get a $20 rebate off their first SeatGeek purchase. To get your $20 rebate, download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab, and click add a promo code. Enter the promo code, which is LOFANTASY. Then SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code LOFANTASY today. Let's get stuck into talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, the fancy pick, I guess, last season to make the playoffs. I'd have to go back and check, but I'm almost 100% sure I didn't have them in the playoffs. They struggled for big chunks of the season with defensive issues, with offensive execution at times, but they did start to get it together towards the end of the season. As we've seen with so many of these bad teams, there have been numerous positives at the end of the year. We saw Phoenix unearth some young guys. We saw Brooklyn go on a strong winning streak when Jeremy Lin returned. We saw Orlando have their core 5 young players really start to mesh well together. We saw Sacramento blood some minutes into Scully Bissiere and Willie Cauley-Stein. So these younger teams who struggled and were bad, we saw some positive signs down the stretch, and the Minnesota Timberwolves were no different to that. They finished the season 31-51, so a long way off the playoff mark there. But they were horrible in terms of expected win-loss. They underperformed their expected wins by 7. That is a big, big deal, meaning they lost a lot of winnable games, or a lot of those coin flip type close games. They weren't able to get it done. So in reality, you expect, in general, when you look at expected win totals, they tend to normalize. Teams that well overperform that the next year they tend to crash back to earth. Teams that go well under that, they tend to have a bit of an improvement next season. So along with natural development of the players and improvement with the young guys they've got, adding in a new pick, a second year under Tom Thibodeau, and hopefully a correction of the underperformance, 40 wins, maybe it's a little bit far off, but I don't think it's that far away. I think there is a possibility that they get to 40. Probably not a playoff team next year, but they are definitely in the right direction, going in the right direction. And for long-suffering Timberwolves fans, which I know there are a few that listen to this podcast, shout out to Trent Copeland, who's a big Wolves fan. Maybe some sort of success is not too far away for you guys. The Timberwolves have just the one pick in this upcoming draft, but it is a good one. It's pick 7. And they're going to have a choice of quite a few good players there. What they do with that pick obviously remains to be seen. I think they'll be looking at taking someone like a Jonathan Isaac if he is available, Jason Tatum. The other option they have is, say, a Malik Monk, especially with Zach LaVine still recuperating from his ACL injury. Do they look for Monk to come in and provide that backup role there, or spot starter? Because when LaVine went down, they were starting garbage like Brandon Rush for the majority of that time. Chris Dunn struggled. There was real struggles in that position, so they do need depth on that wing. Or do they grab a guy like Isaac and have him be that backup to Gorgie Dieng? With Nemanja Bjelica dealing with a serious foot injury himself, becoming partially a stretch 4, a good defensive 4 as well, and giving them a really solid 3-man front court. Tatum might slip there. You might see De'Aaron Fox. You might see Malik Monk. I don't think they'd go with a guy like Fox, but I think they'd be looking at, if Isaac fell, that's almost the perfect situation for the Timberwolves at that spot. We look at their free agent situation. There's not too much to be too concerned about. Jordan Hill's got a non-guaranteed deal. He provided basically sweet FA for them during the season. Brandon Rush, Adrian Payne, and Omri Caspi are all unrestricted free agents. Maybe Rush returns. He's a guy that can go out there and hit a 3 at a pretty decent rate, 40% type 3-point shooter, which can be useful especially for a team like this that just doesn't shoot threes really at all. Getting him in there, not playing a starting role, but playing a minimal role can be useful. Adrian Payne, terrible, useless. Although he did show a couple of things later on, but still bad. Even though he did have that bad blood disorder, thrombocytopenia during the season, he was able to recover and came back, so that's good news. And Omri Caspi, who they signed for God knows what reason, and then barely played him, and then they don't have bird rights to re-sign him. So I like Caspi, but I just don't think he's coming back to Minnesota next year. The big question, though, for the Wolves in terms of free agency is Shabazz Muhammad. He's a restricted free agent. Do they bring Shabazz back? Has he improved enough over the course of his 4 years in the NBA that I think there's a little bit of growth there? I don't know. I think they will bring him back. I don't think there's any hope of him ever becoming a good starter. He's one of those players that people in the fantasy community get real excited about. Shabazz is going to start. He's a must-add guy, and he's just never that guy because A, he's not good, and he just has such a very lacking skill set. He's a points guy that has high field goal percentage and helps you offensive rebounding if you count in that category. But he does nothing else: assists, steals, blocks, hits some threes, and has improved that area of his game. But he's shown incremental improvements throughout his career. Now, whether they bring him back, it's not going to have a massive impact. He's never jumping into a gigantic role. Even with LaVine's status uncertain for the start of the year, I don't even think that makes Muhammad a guy that you'd want to grab to begin the year, because I just don't... Well, we saw at the end of last year, he wasn't that guy that you needed to own, even with LaVine out of the lineup. Let's have... Now, Bobby Madry says they need to trade it. Trade pick 7. What for? Who are they trading it for, and why do they need to trade it? I'd like to hear your reasoning for that, because my thought is, why do they need to trade it? They've got they've got a young core. Their core is like 21 to 25 years of age. So adding another 19 to 20-year-old piece to that, I think is key. They're not making, or they might make the playoffs as a experience thing, like let's get into the 8th seed and let's play something, but they're not doing anything massively. So pushing from the 9th seed to the 7th seed doesn't really do much. I'd rather add another potential young star to that group, unless you're getting some sort of crazy deal back by getting number 7. I just don't see the necessity that they're not in a position of a win now squad where they need to sacrifice young assets to get established decent players. But Bobby says they've got too many young players that need a vet. Why? Why do they need a vet? This is the question that gets thrown up all the time. People say they need a vet. I don't subscribe to that theory. I don't subscribe that you need veteran players. You need all these veteran players, and you can't have multitudes of young guys. I don't. If the young players are good, they will win. We saw that with Philadelphia during the season when Embiid was rolling. They were rolling, and they were as inexperienced as any team, basically. That you don't necessarily need just teams full of older players. And if your young players are good, they will win. They know how to win. They have won their entire life. That's why they've been good players. Yes, you can't have a team full of all 21-year-olds. Brandon Rush gives you a level of experience. Cole Aldrich is an middle-aged sort of a player. Ricky Rubio has been playing professionally for 10 years. I think that's enough sort of veteran influence on this team. Unless you're talking about going hard and getting a Jimmy Butler, which I just don't think that's going to happen. I would much rather have that pick 7, but Bobby, everyone has their opinions on that. I just that's just not the way that I view it, and I would rather get that talent who's in the age range of my core, and let those 3-4 guys develop together and become, if it takes 2 years, become that sort of powerhouse group in 2 years' time. They had the 27th best defensive rating, and in saying that, that means they were the 4th worst. And for a Tom Thibodeau team, that's obviously really, really bad. There's just a lot of defensive issues with this team. Karl-Anthony Towns is not a good defender at this point in his career. We've seen Zach LaVine have real struggles in that area. Muhammad struggles. Wiggins isn't a great defender. The team just looked lost defensively, and Thibodeau was not impressed. Now, hopefully, with an extra preseason, extra training camp of being able to work with his system, they can get it sorted. But it wasn't a great start to the year, and there's only so much a defensive coach can do if the players either aren't good or aren't locked in and aren't buying into the system. So let's hope that does change as we head. And it will, because players do tend to get incrementally better as they get older defensively, and you stop making basic mistakes. But that was not a good area to be in for a Thibodeau team. They were 25th in pace. That was always going to be a concern with this team in terms of their fantasy production, that Thibodeau would come in and really slow things down. Now, the pace of teams at 25th is still 25th, but in terms of overall numbers, like 25th now is higher than, say, 25th 10 years ago. So the pace is still okay, but it's not pushing it like some of those other teams. And they were dead last in three-point attempt rate. They don't have many three-point shooters. Andrew Wiggins is not a good three-point shooter. Ricky Rubio, Chris Dunn are bad three-point shooters. Zach LaVine missed half the season. He's a pretty good three-point shooter, but they needed more shooters on this team, and they needed to have an ability to at least attempt more threes. And that might be something they look to do or look to address in this upcoming free agency, because they do have some room for a free agent as well. And Bobby, back to your point, they could add pick 7 and then go and get some sort of veteran in free agency that can provide that help for this team. Offensive ratings on this team, the highest offensive rating was Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody, but Cole Aldrich coming in second maybe is a little bit of a surprise. I didn't like the way that Thibodeau used Aldrich this season. I am a big proponent of what he can do. I think he's a quality backup center, and I thought he was misused at times by Thibodeau. Rubio came in third, and then Gorgui Dieng, Shabazz Muhammad, and Tyus Jones rounded out that top 6. Defensive rating, Adrian Payne led there in very few minutes, of course. Aldrich next in defensive rating, Chrissy Dunn, Gorgui Dieng, and Karl-Anthony Towns. So for as much as I did bag Chris Dunn during the season, and I have been quite down on his prospects, defensively he did quite a lot of good things for this team. It was just that his offense was an absolute pile of shit for the majority of the year, although there were some improvements later on. But in general, his offense was just horrendous. They had only 3 players shoot over 40% on corner threes: Gorgui Dieng, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Zach LaVine. They need to get more. You've seen plenty of teams with 7, 8, 9 guys that shoot 40% on corner threes, and that's part of why they were only 30th in three-point attempt rate, because they didn't hit, or they couldn't hit them as well as what was necessary at that sort of a level. Wiggins shot 65% at the rim, which is obviously a good amount, but everywhere else in every other distance breakdown over on Basketball Reference, he was under 40%, so 3 to 10 feet, 10 to 16, 16 out to 3, and three-pointers under 40%. And he had some really, really bad nights in terms of his shooting, and that's obviously something that does need to improve if he is to take the next step. The leaders in the advanced stats, there's a lot of Karl-Anthony Towns here, as you could expect. PER, Towns, 26. True shooting, Towns, 62. usage. Wiggins at 29%. Win shares Towns at a massive 12.7. Win shares per 48 Towns at 0.2, which is double the average in the NBA. Offensive box score plus minus Towns. Defensive box score plus minus Aldridge. Box score plus minus Towns. Vorp. Towns. He was awesome. Karl-Anthony Towns was ridiculous. We know he's ridiculous. He started off the season a little bit slowly, and people were very quick to, why did I waste a first-round pick on this guy? Killing me. And then ended up, as we'll talk about in a sec, as the fourth-ranked player after the All-Star break and absolutely crushed it down the end. Let's have a look at some of their lineups. Their most used five-man lineup, I don't think there's any surprise here. Gorgie Jeng, Zach LaVine, Rubio, Wiggins, and Towns. That played a whopping 880 minutes. And I've talked about these other teams that had like 2 lineups over 100 minutes and 0 lineups over 200. Thibodeau knows what's up. 880. And LaVine missed half the season with an ACL. He went hard with his best players, and I'm totally in on that. Now, maybe some of the minutes for some of those guys was a little bit high, and he played them in unnecessary situations like, down 20 with 8 minutes left, let's get all our guys in there and run them the last 8 minutes of the game. That, to me, sounds stupid. But using your best players the most, I'm there for that. The best lineup that saw over 100 minutes was Jeng, Muhammad, Wiggins, Rubio, and Towns, and that was a plus 12.1 points per 100 possessions. Interestingly, you're playing Muhammad at the 3 there, and you've got Jeng and Towns, so a fairly big lineup with limited shooting was still quite effective for this team. Their most used 4-man lineup, Jeng, Rubio, Towns, and Wiggins, unsurprising, and that was a positive as well, while their best 4-man was that Jeng, Muhammad, Towns combination, along with Wiggins, which was 15.3. That's a huge number there too. Their most used 3-man, Rubio, Towns, Wiggins, no surprise, basically a bang-on neutral lineup. Well, their best 3-man was Jeng, Wiggins, and Rush. And you're seeing Jeng's name appear in a lot of these best lineups because he was, from on-offs and plus-minus perspective, really the best player on this team, which clearly he's not the best player, but in terms of that perspective and what he does for the team in terms of hard stuff, defensive stuff, gritty stuff, he is quite an underrated player in that sort of an aspect. Their best 2-man lineup was, or their most used 2-man lineup was Towns and Wiggins. That was, again, basically a neutral, while their best 2-man, Jeng and Rush. Again, Gorgie Jeng's name just popping up all the time here. Let's talk about stash players. The only guy that's really of any notice here is Bojan Dublevic, who is a Montenegrin center. He plays in the Spanish league for Valencia. He's 25 years of age. He's 6'8". He looks bigger than that. He looks like Nikola Pekovic, basically. Massive shoulders, huge man, big furry beard. But he stretches the floor a little bit. He can hit some threes. He was a second-round pick back in 2013. He played 21 minutes a game for Valencia this season. He averaged 13 and 6 in those 21 minutes. He hit. Look, this is the thing. He's this guy that plays as like a power forward center. He blocked 0.2 shots a game. So he's not, he is Pekovic that hits threes. He hit 0.9 threes a game on 36% with a 48, 36, 84 split, true shooting of 59, a usage of 30, and a PER of 23. He is quite a dominant offensive player. As you see, there's 13 points in 21 minutes in Europe is a very impressive number from Dublevic. He's a guy that could come across and fit a backup role, although if you are bringing in a guy like Jonathan Isaac, you're going to have Jeng playing that backup center role. You've already got Aldridge. Like, where does Dublevic fit? When he was drafted, he'd signed a 2-year deal with Valencia, so he should be. He signed that in 2015, so he should be ready to come across now. No indication whether he actually will, and I don't know how big his role will actually be. If he does, I feel it will be fairly limited. But if Jordan Hill goes, he can move into the Jordan Hill role and be a guy that, for this team, again, who doesn't shoot threes, having a big that can pop out and shoot them at a pretty respectable and reliable rate. Dublevic could be that player who in 20-plus team leagues could have an impact and find himself in the rotation. So he is the name to watch, but it's nothing spectacular for a guy like him at all. All right, let's get into talking about these players in that little bit of extra detail that we like to do. We'll start, of course, with Karl-Anthony Towns, the reigning rookie of the year, who came in and was a fairly popular pick to go high in drafts. I saw him go as high as 4 in some drafts. He was almost undoubtedly going in the top 10. And at the start of the year, people were a little bit disappointed with the results. But when we look at his numbers for the year, you can't be disappointed. He averaged 25 and 12. He hit 1.2 threes. He had 2.7 assists, 0.7 steals, 1.3 blocks, and shot 54 and 83, including 37% from three. The team was 1.5 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, and he's, as I said before, he post All-Star break, he was the 4th ranked player. 4th. That's how good he was. In that time, Towns averaged 28 and 13.5. He hit 1.5 threes, and he shot 59 and 85 for a true shooting of 66%. He had a massive, massive impact in the field goal percentage. Massive points, huge rebounds. The only thing that I guess was a little bit disappointing was his block numbers down at 0.8, and they were a source of consternation throughout the season. He played an extra 5 minutes per game this year as opposed to his rookie year, but saw his blocks drop from 1.7 down to 1.3. Now, part of that is the fact that Thibodeau had him out playing the 4 on defense and Gorgie Jeng playing the 5, and Towns would go, and they'd sort of interchange, and Towns would go out into the perimeter quite a bit more, and that did impact his block total. We also saw him increase his scoring rate per 36. He tripled his 3-point rate per 36 as well. Increase in rebounding, increase in assists, and then just a marginal decrease in his defensive stuff with his steals and blocks dropping. In the end, his field goal percentage was identical to last season, especially, which is great considering that he started the year shooting like 49% for the first couple of months, which saw him ranked, say, in the 20s, and had a lot of people really disappointed with a guy they probably picked in their top 5. But overall, he just crushed it. He was consistently shooting 57, 58% for the last months of the season, and got that back up to 54 to finish the season red hot. In fact, for the last 25 games of the year, he shot 60% from the field, 43% from three, which is an absolutely ludicrous amount for a guy as big as he is. You don't expect much to change from that second half of the year for Towns heading into next season. He's going to play the big minutes. Does he improve his defensive numbers? Can he be a steal and a 1.5 block guy? The 1.5 block guy, of course. He did it in his rookie year, so he can do that. But if Thibodeau is going to use him switching out a little bit onto the 4, it is going to impact that. The one thing I think he can have a big increase in is assists. Now, maybe not a big increase, but 2.7. If he averaged 3.7, I wouldn't be stunned. He's a very good passer, and Thibodeau's offense didn't often allow that. But we've seen Thibodeau use Joakim Noah as a center who facilitates things, and Towns could grow into that role. So if he becomes a 4-assist a game guy at some point, don't be surprised, and that's going to push him very firmly into the number 1 fantasy player category. In 2 years' time, I think he'll be there anyway, just as we see an improvement in some of those defensive numbers. But he is going to be a staple top 5 pick, regardless if he's number 1 or number 2, for years to come. In those last 10 games of the season, he averaged 30 points a game. And that's not a crazy thing to expect him to do for a season in, say, 2 or 3 years' time, to be a 30 and 13 guy with 1.5 blocks and 4 assists. And those numbers are spectacularly good. He's the player that, if you're looking at dynasty leagues, it's either him or Yanni that you take at number 1, I believe. If you're starting a new dynasty league, they're the guys that you want. Obviously, you can have Harden and Westbrook and Curry, but for sustained excellence, Towns is 21 years of age. So he's got a long way to go up, and the 4th ranked guy after the All-Star break is obviously an impressive number for him, and he is going to be putting those numbers up for quite a long time. Bobby chimes in again. He says, I won my league this year, and I'm strongly considering Cat with the first pick next year. Obviously, I haven't gone through and run all the projections on people, but it's going to be hard to say that that's going to be a wrong selection. I would probably go back with a Harden again or Westbrook, but Towns is going to be a top 5 guy. You're going to have Harden, Westbrook, probably KD, Yanni and Towns as your top 5 would be my early guess. Well, Anthony Davis as well. So there is a lot of talent to spread around there. So picking him at number 1, if you're looking for that really solid field goal percentage advantage, which is what he gives you, nothing wrong with that. That's a fine sort of decision to make, I believe. Let's talk about Ricky Rubio. Ravishing Rick Rubio. I don't even know what the right word is. The hate? No, not hate. disrespect, but I hate using that word, for Rick Rubio across social media, basketball media is astounding to me. The fact that the Timberwolves drafted Chris Dunn, which is fine. I thought it was a mistake. I thought they should have drafted the Blue Arrow at that pick. I was not a big Chris Dunn fan heading into things. But the fact that, drafting Chris Dunn, we've got to trade Rubio immediately. Rubio's not going to start this season. Dunn's going to play. And I was really adamant of this. Is Chris Dunn is just going to be a worse version of Ricky Rubio. He's a worse passer. He's as bad a shooter. He's an equal defender. He's a bit bigger. But Rubio, to me, and he's 2 years younger? That's it. He's not a young player. So to me, it just didn't make any sense. The rumored Derrick Rose for Ricky Rubio trade was absolute insanity to me. I would want Rubio every single day of the week over Derrick Rose. I just feel that the Timberwolves may not value Rubio as much as they should. Now, he was absolutely fantastic this season. He suffered an injury in about the 5th game of the year to his elbow. They were horrible without him. He took a little bit of time to come back after that. But once he was back in business from that elbow issue, it was full steam ahead. He ended the season averaging 11 points a game, 0.8 threes, 4 rebounds, 9 assists, 1.7 steals, and finally cracked the 40% field goal percentage mark for the first time in his career. 89 from the line and 31 from 3 for a true shooting of 54%. The Timberwolves were basically neutral with him on-off. His on-off was 0.1, and he saw his ranking rise to 24th post-All-Star. 24th. That's how good he was. And the numbers he put up post-All-Star: 15 points, 0.9 threes, 4.5 boards, 10.5 assists, 1.6 steals, and shot 42, 91, and 33 for a true shooting of 54.5. Big improvement from Ricky Rubio this season. People talk about injury. He's so injury prone. Ricky Rubio's games played the last 4 years: 82, 22, that was when he suffered that massive ankle ligament tear, then 76 and 75. So again, at some point, your injury prone label, it has to dissipate because it's not accurate. He's not injury prone. And again, I've been fighting against this stereotype for years. He's not injury prone. He plays games. He plays lots of games. He saw his scoring rate increase this year. He saw his assist rate stay about the same. The only real decrease, and this could have led to a top 20 finish for Rubio, is that his steal rate went from 2.5. In fact, the last 3 years, he'd been at over 2 steals per 36 minutes. It went down to 1.9. So from 2.5 down to 1.9. But he saw his field goal percentage go from 37 up to 40. He saw his free throws go from 85 up to 89. Yeah, big improvements in those areas. Now, if you drafted Rubio, you were likely... you weren't necessarily punting field goal percentage because the amount of attempts that he took was so minimal that you could easily recover from that. His Z score in that category was last season was just a negative 1.29, which is nowhere near puntable or nowhere near must punt. This year, he took some more attempts and shot better, and the Z score went to negative 1.09, so a little bit easier to recover from. But it's his valuable assist, the fact that he really started getting the scoring going, his above average rebounding for his position, his great steal rate, and his fantastic free throws. Now, the thing you have to throw in there is that did Rubio's play really pick up when Zach LaVine went down? And the answer is yes. And part of the reason the answer is yes is because of the coach, is because of Tom Thibodeau, because he was running a horrendous offense when LaVine was there. Rubio would come down, he'd give the ball to Wiggins, he'd give the ball to LaVine, and he'd go and stand in the corner, and those two guys would try to dribble and ISO and create, and they're shit at it. Yeah, LaVine is a bad passer. He's a bad decision maker. Wiggins is not an ISO distributor, playmaker guy. And when they went back to stuff that made sense of like, hey, let's let the best, or the top 3 passer, initiator, play runner in the NBA pass, run, play make, things started to work out a little bit better for Rubio. For Towns, we saw Towns' numbers shoot up. Rubio played better. The team played better, and you would hope that that's the way they head back into next season with Rubio doing that. But I honestly can't put 100% faith in Tom Thibodeau doing that. I can't put 100% faith that he doesn't do something dumb like sign Derrick Rose in free agency, like trade Ricky Rubio, or for some God-known reason, start Chris Dunn. So there is a level of concern with Rubio. I love Rubio. I think he's a very good point guard. I think he's a top half point guard in the NBA. But I worry that there's going to be some sort of dickery in Minnesota that does have an issue with him. Now, in terms of you're looking to capitalize on a top 25 finish to the end of the season from Rubio in a dynasty league, you're not going to be able to, because people hate him in numerous areas. And unless they're attuned to my line of thinking, they're going to say, he's not worth a top 25 pick. He's not worth a top 40 pick. Shit, he's not worth a top 50 pick. He's not worth a top 70 player. People will say that. You could have gotten Rubio late, like in the 70s last year. And I did it in many different places. And I think that same sort of thing will come back again in this offseason, especially if stuff starts going down in free agency. So being able to cash in on Rubio is a lot easier to say than it is to execute, just given the general misinformation or general thought process on his game, which to me is just... it's baffling. It is one of the more confusing things, especially, I get into these arguments all the time, Rubio or Rose, who is better, and my brain just explodes. Or Rubio and Rondo. My brain just explodes to see the difference between those sort of players and the fact that Rubio always gets pushed behind. But that's enough of the Ricky Rubio. Enough of the Ricky Rubio love fest here. He was fantastic to end the season, and I would hope that he is the guy, and he should be the guy, that can push forward with these young guys and work with them and start to develop. But look, maybe he only has 1 or 2 more seasons left in Minnesota. That's a possibility. But I think that he is a starting point guard in the NBA for the next 5 years. Whether that's Minnesota or not, I don't know. But you're going to be churning out 2 steals, 10 assists, hopefully 14, 15 points, high free throw percentage, 4 to 5 rebounds for the next few years. And the only thing that will stop it is some sort of weird mid-season benching from Thibodeau or trade or something, until he can find himself into another spot where he starts and puts up those good numbers. So there is a level of concern that I do have there, which again is going to frustrate me no end when that actually goes down. Zach LaVine played 47 minutes. He scored 47 games, 37 minutes a game. He averaged 18.9 points, third on this team behind Towns and Wiggins. He hit 2.6 triples, 3.5 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal on 46 and 84, and shot 39% from 3. Super efficient stuff. And he was the 57th ranked player this season. Obviously, that torn ACL meant we didn't get to see him after the All-Star break. Despite these numbers, which look really good, he was a team worst, minus 4.3 in on-off numbers. And watching LaVine is a frustrating exercise at times. As I said, some of the times when he's given the ball to try and initiate stuff, it just looks ugly. He looks lost at times, passing or handling or dribbling. But in terms of being a shooting guard who can shoot, he's definitely worked on that, and he is that guy. He can shoot. He's obviously athletic. He can cut. His defense is still a disaster, and there's lots of work that needs to be done there. And it's getting to that stage where you think maybe he can never even become a not even like a neutral defender. He's just always going to be a bad defender. And having that and Wiggins paired on the wing might not be the best situation for this team. What's LaVine's best role moving forward? It probably is as a sixth man, to be honest, somewhere, but it's not going to be the case here on this team when he comes back. The problem is that when is he going to come back? When he went down with that knee injury, the initial word was 12 months. And that means that he's not playing November, he's not playing December, so he's not going to be there for the first 2 months. Now, people do recover from ACLs quicker than that, but the fact that the initial diagnosis was 12 months straight away was a little bit of a concern to me with LaVine. And heading into the season, not only will he be rehabbing the knee and might not start the year, but coming off an ACL, people are very rarely the same initially. We saw Jabari Parker return in his first season from the ACL. It took him 2.5 months to really get anything cracking, which he did in that second half of his second season. And if LaVine doesn't come back till, say, mid-December, end of December, then you're talking about maybe March when he starts to approach top 60 value. So his value is going to be in the tank. So if you're a dynasty team that's maybe not competing this year or looking to build, acquiring him if he is on a win now strong team, if you can do that for less than value, it might be worth doing. Just because I think he is going to have a down season. Or even if you wait until October and it's he's still 2 months away, then you try and go in and acquire him there and get some value out of LaVine. he was strong this season. The threes were good, the scoring was good, the efficiency is super good for him, but he does have limitations on the court, and at some point, I think that might catch up with him, and he might have that issue where the defense just does limit him in terms of his overall role. But I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon. Look, maybe the Wolves grab Malik Monk, and Monk shows that he can do it, but he has his own concerns in terms of handling the ball and defensive stuff especially, and size. And I think Levine probably is going to be a better option than Monk there. But that's the thing. Like, what does this ACL injury actually do to him? Does it really limit him athletically, which is obviously a huge plus in his game? So there is some level of concern there. As for Gorgui Dieng, the next player, he was the 60th ranked player for the season. So the Wolves had 4 guys finish inside the top 60 this season. Dieng played 32 minutes a night, averaged just the 10 points, but 8 boards, 2 assists, over a steal, 1.2 blocks, 50 and 81 is his percentages, and he shot 38% on threes. Yes, that was on a really, really small amount. He only hit 0.2 threes per game, but he had a true shooting of 56%. And while you look at Dieng's numbers, they don't look sexy. 10 points is not great. 8 rebounds is all right, but it's the ability for him to do it efficiently from both the field and the line, and give you over a steal and over a block, which is where his value really comes in. Now, his extension kicks in this year, 4 years, $64 million contract to Gorgui Dieng. And in the end, while it does hamper the Timberwolves' flexibility somewhat, for the actual value that he provides, and we've seen it through many of these things that I've mentioned here, he led the team in on-off at 3.9. He saw his name in all those best lineups. He's a really good player. And even if it is $64 million, would you rather play $64 million to Gorgui Dieng, or would you rather play it to Bismack Biyombo, or would you rather play it to Tim Mozgov, or to Luol Deng, or to Jan Mahinmi? And the answer in all of those situations is Dieng by a country mile. There's no debate about that. Yes, he's not as young as some of these other players. He's 27 years of age. And at some point, he is going to transition into a backup, and that could be as early as the 2018-19 season, especially if the Wolves acquire someone like Jonathan Isaac and they play, say, Dieng and Towns as the starters together this year, and then move Isaac into that position next year and have Dieng as that backup 5, backup 4 in a 28-minute-a-game role, which would suit him perfectly, given all the stuff that he does defensively. And all of that, all those hustle things that he does, the ability to pop out and hit a long 2 has improved from him as well, something that he had struggled to do in the past. From 10 to 16 feet, he was 45%, and from 16 feet out to 3, he was at 43%. Like, very, very strong numbers from Gorgui Dieng. So he was impressive in that sense, just being consistent in terms of his fantasy rank the last 3 years, 53rd, 60th, and 57th over the last 3 seasons. He's played all 82 games for 2 years in a row. He provides that defensive stuff. And you look at his stats this year versus last year. 10.1 points, 10 points. 7.1 boards, 7.9 boards. 1.1 steals, 1.1 steals. 1.2 blocks, 1.2 blocks. Now, last year he did do it in 5 less minutes because he was more efficient as well this year, last year shooting 53 versus 50%. But those numbers are just remarkably similar for Gorgui Dieng. And I think that when you're talking about him in dynasty perspective, he is going to be this guy that probably got 1 year left at this level, I would guess, and then he transitions into a couple of years at the 100 to 120 rank sort of a range as he moves from a 32-minute guy to a 28, 29, assuming they get a power forward like a Jonathan Isaac or Jason Tatum in the draft, which is the way that I think that things will play out. But that is, if that happens, just be expecting Dieng's value to start to drop. But for this coming season, I would still anticipate he's that top 75 sort of guy that really brings the value in the underappreciated categories, both percentages and steals and blocks, whereas he's not giving you anything sexy in terms of point scoring, but bringing it in those harder to get categories, and that obviously has its use as well. The next player we're going to take a look at, Wiggo, Andrew Wiggins. It's hard to know what to make of Andrew Wiggins at this point. He was the 85th ranked player this year. I thought there was a real chance he jumped up inside the top 50. That obviously didn't happen. And it doesn't happen because he just is such a limited contributor in categories that aren't points. Wiggins averaged 23.6 points this year, 1.3 triples, which was a good number for him, 4 boards, 2.3 assists, a steal, 45, 76, and 36 as his percentages. The team was a positive 2.7 with him on the court, so that's good. But in terms of his head-to-head numbers, he was ranked 107th pre-All-Star, 96th post, which is obviously worse than his overall season numbers because he gives you that really good boost in points, and then nothing else is a positive for him at all. Everything else is a marginal negative. A negative contribution in threes. Only just negative rebounding, negative assists, negative steals, negative blocks, negative field goal, negative free throw percentage. Just consistently under where he needs to be in both of those areas. And post All-Star, not much change. He scored a bit more with Levine out, went to almost 26 points a game, but still the rebounding, 3.6 for a guy of his length is horrendous. He just doesn't show enough effort on that end. And his passing is poor. His steals, he got his steals up to 1.2, which is good because that was something that was lacking a little bit from him. He's averaged 1 steal a game in all 3 of his NBA seasons, but he got it up to 1.2 post All-Star. Obviously, that meant pre-All-Star, he was going at under a steal a game, which is horrendous for a guy with his defensive length and hopefully aptitude. Just hasn't shown it yet. Is he a possibility to be a top 50 guy next year? Well, I thought it could be this year. It wasn't to be. He's found himself inside the top 100 marginally for the last 2 years, and I think another top 100 season is almost a guarantee. But where does he actually improve? The scoring, almost 24 a game, does that go up? Maybe hard to go up from there. He doubled his three-pointer output. Where it needs to come is he needs to go to 1.3 steals. He needs to go to 5.5 rebounds, 6 rebounds. He needs to go to 3.5 assists. But I just really doubt, given his lack of effort in the rebounding and defensive stuff and his unwillingness or his poor passing, I'm just not ever sure he's going to get there. I would almost categorically rule out Wiggins as being a top 20 fantasy player ever. I don't think that will happen, but I still do think that he can get himself into the top 50 at some point. I reckon we look for a marginal increase for next season and pushes to be a top 70 guy, but there's just so many things where I'm just not sold on him being an overall fantasy contributor. Now, getting 24, 25 points a game is super, super valuable, and that alone pushes his draft value up 2 rounds or so, because you can't get that sort of a contribution in that category. You have to obviously be aware that you're not getting anything positive anywhere else. But I think that we might see him push up to maybe 1.73s next year, and that might get him to that 50 mark. And I reckon that will be where you need to draft him, around that 50 zone. And I don't think I'd have too much of a problem with it, just if I'm not punting points, to get those 23 points there. The only guys you can get normally around that mark is a DeMar DeRozan, who gets 20 points. Maybe a karl-anthony will slide down to that area, but getting 20 points out of a player at that area is really, really tough to do. Pretty much all of the top scorers go, or all of the, I think when I looked at it, the top 50 scorers last year, 48 of them were ranked inside the top 50 for fantasy. So finding a high-level scorer is not easy to do once you get outside that zone. So that does push Wiggins' value up, just being able to get those 23, 24, 25 points per game. So I would look for an improvement. Pushing the top 50 is probably the limit of what I can see from him next season, and I don't ever see him becoming a top 20 guy. But he showed a few flashes, but the consistency was a real issue, and the lack of effort at times defensively. We had those 5 guys, all top 100 players for the Timberwolves. Towns, Rubio, Levine, Jeng, Wiggins. And there was an opportunity, I thought, that they could have 5 top 50 players. And it wasn't that far off. They had 5 top 85 guys. The next guy is Nemanja Bjelica, who was the 249th ranked player. So such a massive, massive drop-off after that. Bjelica is one of those guys that, again, the fantasy community really gets behind for some reason, that as soon as anything starts happening with Bjelica, we need to grab him. We need to, I remember his rookie season, he played 3 games and shot 60% from 3 for 3 games. And it's he is the must-own guy. You got to grab him. Really? And then he just didn't hit a shot for 4 months. Last year, again, he's going to come in. He's going to start over Jeng. He's going to play all these minutes. He's a guy you grab. Not so much. He played 18 minutes in 65 games and ended the season with a fractured foot, which is not a great sign for a guy that was slow-footed to begin with and not all that athletic. He is 28 years old already. I think what we see is what we get from Nemanja Bjelica. He averaged 6 points a game. He hit a 3, almost 4 boards. Defensively, he's just non-existent. 0.6 steals, 0.3 blocks, and shot 42, 74, and 32%. Which is a true shooting of 53%, which if you're unaware, that's bad. The team was a positive with him on the court, 2.7 points, and he did show some flashes. And we saw him post All-Stars, his ranking rose to 159th, which is an impressive thing as well to jump up that much. But is it actually something that we can make use of moving forward? The answer to that is no. Again, I think they bring in a power forward or a forward in this draft class. He's recovering from a broken foot. I don't think we ever see a top 100 season from Bjelica. I don't think we ever see really a top 150 season from Bjelica. I think this is just who he is. He's 28 years of age. He's going to be a guy that shoots threes and doesn't do it all that well, and provides nothing defensively, and occasionally has the big game and people get real excited about it. So I think that he sort of sits at this level, and hopefully he can recover from that foot, but that is a genuine concern, and I reckon he sees a bit of a decline next season in his playing time and his value. We will see how that goes. Chris Dunn, the 262nd ranked player this season. He played in 78 games as a rookie. He played 17 minutes a game, but this was the player that NBA players, that NBA GMs said was going to be the rookie of the year. How could they be so wrong? It was incredulous to me that they would say that at the time. It looked even more ridiculous as the season went on. Chris Dunn was bad. He was very, very bad for massive, massive chunks of the season. Like really, really bad. I can't stress how bad he was. He had a true shooting of 43%. He had a PR of 8. He barely had a positive win share, 0.1. Massive offensive liability, but defensively, he was good. And there is no denying that he was a good defensive player. For the year, he averaged 3.8 points, 0.3 triples, 2 boards, 2.5 assists, a steal, half a block on 37, 61, and 29. So obviously horrible shooting across all areas, and I don't have great faith in him ever becoming a good or even average shooter. That true shooting of 43% is absolutely abysmal. The Wolves, though, they were worse with him on the court. 2.6 points per 100 possessions worse with him on the court. Now, some of that's to do with Rubio being a positive, but a lot of it's due to him being an absolute disaster offensively. You can talk about young players. He's still 22. He's about to turn 23. So he is decently... He's not old, but he's also not 19. He's not 20. And the big thing about coming in is NBA ready. And let's be honest, NBA ready is a load of shit. It is just a load of shit. When you go, oh, this guy's NBA ready coming in, he's had this college experience. It's a load of shit. It doesn't mean anything to me, because in general, the players who have stayed longer in college are worse players. Otherwise, they would have gone after their first year or second year. And a lot of their college success comes from being 4 years older than the players they're playing against and having that experience level. And they come into the NBA and they're just not quite as talented. Buddy Hield, for example. Dunn here is another one. Doug McDermott, another one. But there are players who that doesn't apply to. Damian Lillard obviously was an older player in college and was fine in the NBA. So it's always just a mixed bag. It's never he's NBA ready, and we use it like it's Dunn will be able to come in and be NBA ready and contribute. It's as much a lottery as the actual NBA lottery as to whether these guys will adapt or be able to play. The positive, I guess, for Dunn is that post All-Star, he ranked 190th. So a bit of a jump there. He averaged 4 points a game, 2.3 assists in his 18 minutes with 1.2 steals, and shot just under 40%. And more importantly to me, 78% from the line, up from his 61% from the season. So improved there and shot 33% from the field. So it's not a complete disaster. Now, I've been pretty harsh against Chris Dunn. I didn't like the pick. I didn't like him as a player. I think maybe it was me being reactionary against everyone saying I'd start Dunn, trade Rubio, and I'm just going like, do you have any idea what you're talking about? But at some point, Dunn, I think, is a solid backup point guard. I don't think that he will ever become as good as Rubio. I don't think that he will ever become a starting, or I don't think he ever should become a starting point guard. Now, whether Thibodeau does that and starts him, there's a possibility that he does that. But just because he was the 5th pick doesn't mean you have to invest everything in him and clear the path for him to get minutes, because sometimes fifth picks aren't good. Thomas Robinson, there's a guy that was the fifth pick. Any of these guys that were high picks, Anthony Bennett, Dion Waiters, Jimmer Fredette was the seventh pick, Nick Stauskas, Ben McLemore. How many of these top 8, top 10 guys are terrible? Maybe Dunn is one of those guys, so you don't just automatically say, let's clear everything out and give Dunn the reins. I'd be interested to see what he does this season. I'm definitely not putting it out of the realms of possibility that Thibodeau does something dumb and gives off Rubio or says that Dunn's going to be the starter. But even if he is, he's going to be that player who's a steal specialist who provides good blocks for his position, and that can all be useful, no doubt about that, but really hurts you in the field goal percentage category, doesn't score, and is an average assist guy, which makes him a back-end top 120, top 140 point guard if he played 30 minutes. I think that's sort of where he would sit. His ranking for the season in per 36 minutes in head-to-head was 197th, so it's not like he's a top 70 per 36 guy that we're really waiting to get this extra chance. I don't buy into Dunn as a long-term prospect. I don't buy into him as ever being a top 75 fantasy player. I don't even really buy into him as a top 100 guy. If I had to lean one way or the other, I say bust. If anything, I'm not declaring him that at all at this point. But if you had to say, will Chris Dunn become a starter, or will he be playing in China in 6 years? I say China in 6 years. That would be the way I'd lean. It might maybe 51-49, but that's how I see it. I just don't see him developing into anything really special, or his flaws having, or him being able to overcome his flaws. So, in terms of breaking that down to fantasy and dynasty value, if you hold him and someone wants to give you a top 10 pick in this draft, in a rookie draft, wants to give you a top 75 ranked player back in return, I would do it. No hesitation whatsoever. Now, I think it'd be hard to expect someone to do that, but there are still a lot of Chris Dunn believers around, much less than there were at the start of the year, but there are still some around. I just don't really buy Dunn as ever becoming a great player, and certainly not really sure that he ever becomes good either. Tyus Jones, he is a better player than Chris Dunn. He was a better player before the season. He showed that he was a better player during the season. I think he will become a better player than Chris Dunn in general. He played, he was in and out of the lineup. I didn't like the way that he was used at times. 60 games for the year. He played 12.9 minutes, so 13 minutes, 3.5 points, a rebound, half a three, 2.5 assists, 0.8 steals on 41 and 77% shooting for Tyus Jones. Here, the team was 3.8 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court versus on the bench, which was second best on the team behind Gorgie Dieng. He was solid. There were the times when he got the minutes, I thought he did well. He saw his PER just under 14, which is almost average, and he is only 20 years old, so he is the youngest player on this team still. He saw pretty impressive advanced numbers, average win shares, solid offensive box score plus minus, does struggle a little bit defensively. But if you only struggle a little bit defensively as a point guard, it's not as big a deal. If you're horrendous, it's an issue. But if you are not awesome at defensive point guard, it's easier to hide than being not awesome on the wing or not awesome as a big man. And Jones fits into that territory. Good passer, shot the ball pretty well from three especially. I thought he was pretty impressive there. And he would have been the guy that I ran as the backup point guard all season. That's not the way Thibodeau looked at it. He is a guy that if I am another team, I would be trying to acquire off Minnesota. Because say if he was on Philadelphia last year, I think he would have started, and I think he would have been a top 75 player, no doubt, as the starting point guard on the Sixers. If they could have found a way to get him, of course, off Minnesota. So he is the guy. I always have these guys that are buried and you always should try and look at. And Rashawn Holmes is one of those guys in Philadelphia. Jones is that guy in Minnesota. You should try and get them and see what you can develop with them. So to me, he is a very deep dynasty sort of guy, but he does have that ability. If things fall his way, I wouldn't be surprised to see Tyus Jones start for a couple of years in the NBA. Eric Wagner chimes in. Does Dunn have any chance of being a top 15 point guard if he's moved to a point guard hungry team like the Knicks? No, I don't know. I don't think he's good. I don't think. I won't say no. He's got no chance because that's being too absolute. yes, he's got a chance. Is it a big one? No, it's very, very small, and I wouldn't be putting my money on him becoming a good point guard at any point, regardless if he moves to a team that needs a point guard. They might need one. He won't be the answer. I don't think. I could end up being really wrong on this. In time, it's after 1 year, so writing someone off after 1 year is always a risky proposition, and I'm not 100% writing him off, but I'm say 85% of the way there. So no, I don't really have a massive amount of faith in Chris Dunn, if you haven't already noticed. Shabazz Muhammad, 78 games for Muhammad this season, 19 minutes. He averaged 10 points. He hit 0.6 threes, got the 3 boards, and was 48 and 77 for a true shooting of 57%. Obviously, that's okay for Muhammad. And after the All-Star break, he averaged 11 points per game. With Levine going down, not much change for him. He did score a little bit more, but he played actually less minutes post-All-Star than pre-All-Star. And he was the guy that a lot of people were like, we need to go and grab Muhammad because he's going to play all these extra minutes. And Thibodeau just said, no, he's just going to play this same role, his bench efficient post-scoring wing, which is basically what he is, and can hit some threes. Now, post-All-Star, he hit only 16% of his threes and 50% of his overall field goals, so obviously a discrepancy between those numbers. But he just is this guy, and I really don't see much changing for Muhammad. Really good offensive rebounder, so if you count that category, he can have some value, but we're talking about deeper league stuff for Shabazz. The team was 0.9 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the bench, but that's a really small number. We're talking 200 team leagues. He's a guy that is a top 300 guy and with the ability to maybe be a top 250 guy, but I think at this point we sort of know who Shabazz Muhammad is, and I don't really see any sort of breakout for him coming at any point. Omri Caspi, weird season, played 14 games for did he play? No, so played 13 games for Minnesota. Had that time in Sacramento where he was injured and misused, not a surprise. Then played for New Orleans for a little bit and they weirdly cut him, which was a bad decision. He played 17 minutes a game in Minnesota for 3.5 points. I don't think he'll be back. I like Caspi. He needs to find himself a role where he can play 28 minutes, and if he plays 30, then he is a top 150 guy. But I think we're getting to the stage where NBA GMs are just not big fans of Omri Caspi. And it's happened in quite a number of different spots. He's also struggled everywhere he's played apart from Sacramento, which is just a weird thing to say, that the only place that he's been good is in Sacramento. I don't really have huge faith in Caspi ever becoming a real fantasy threat again, outside of maybe a second half of the year guy with multiple injuries hit a team and he can jump in and play 30 minutes and be good again and then get overlooked once more. And I think that's probably his fate as we move forward. Brandon Rush played 47 games for the season, 22 minutes a game, but post-All-Star he started the majority of those with Levine out, 26 minutes after the All-Star break, 4.7 points, 2.5 rebounds, half a steal, half a block. So those defensive numbers, the fact that he hit a 3 a game and shot 39% was useful. Weirdly, when Levine was out before the ACL, when he had some injury issues earlier on, Rush came in, played like 35 minutes, and put up monster numbers. So when Levine went down, I grabbed Rush in every league. I thought, you know what? He won't do this every game, but the minutes will be fine, and he's got this ability to put up these numbers. We've seen it, the defensive stuff, the blocks, the steals, some threes, some scoring, and then he was just invisible. He just didn't touch the ball. His usage was minuscule. He just didn't do anything, basically, for the entirety of that time when Levine went down. And as I said earlier, he is an unrestricted free agent heading into this season. So where he ends up, whether he's back with this team or not, remains to be seen. He's 31 years of age as it is, and he had a PER of 6.6. So teams aren't going to be necessarily lining up to get Brandon Rush. And in majority of fantasy leagues, you're not going to be caring about him either. He is clearly on the downhill slide. My boy Cole Aldrich was the 365th ranked player this year. I really disliked the way that he was used, only 8.6 minutes per game. But I understand why, because they ran Jeng and Towns as the centers. I thought they might run Jeng more at the 4 and limit Bielitsa's minutes somewhat, but it was Aldrich that suffered. He had 1.7 points and 2.5 rebounds. Still, he is a guy that when he gets an opportunity, the numbers come for Aldridge. The advanced stuff generally really likes what he can do. Defensively, he can be a real problem, or problem for the opposition team. Like he's quite a good defender. They were neutral with him on or off the court, not much change there, but he just doesn't see enough minutes. And with Jeng and Towns, and Jeng probably pushing more to be a backup centre as we move forward. I don't really see much here for Aldridge moving forward. He was an interesting guy last year. When he was with the Clippers, he crushed it. He put up great numbers in 18, 19 minutes. Couldn't even get anywhere near that in Minnesota, which again was weird to me, but that was the way that Thibodeau used it. So I wouldn't be having too much hope for him as we move forward. The last two guys on this team, Adrian Payne and Jordan Hill. Jordan Hill played just 7 games. Weirdly had a couple of starts, which was bizarre considering how absolutely dreadful he was for them. How many starts did he actually have? Oh, none. I thought he did start. My mistake. He played 7 games, didn't start any of them. And Adrian Payne played 18. Payne won't be back. Hill is a non-guaranteed. I would think that they would get out of that. There's no reason to pay him that sort of money anymore, and I have absolutely no faith in either of those guys being useful fantasy contributors at any point in the rest of their NBA career. Let's get on to some questions that people had about the Minnesota Timberwolves. Trent Copeland says, can you please explain to me why on earth people continue to hate on Rubio? Trent, I wish I knew, man. I wish I knew. He says if Tibbs signs Derrick Rose, he's going to lose it. I'll be there with you, mate. I don't understand the Rubio hate. It's bizarre to me. James C. Is Zach LaVine at a huge discount in Dynasty this season? And do you think he can become a real fantasy threat again? Yes, I do think that he can become a threat. He's never going to be a top 20 guy or a top 25 guy. And as I said earlier, I reckon you probably can get him at a discount. Now, whether that discount comes now or when it comes with the news that he's going to be out for November and December, that's when some value comes. But if he's on a rebuilding team, you won't get him. If he's on a challenging team, a real strong team, and he's going to miss the first 2 months, maybe you can do it then. Jackie Anderson, who do you like for them in the draft? Isaac, good second-tier free agent possibilities. Haven't really looked too much into who they're going to get in free agency. That's too much of a crapshoot for me at this point. He says, also, is Gorky a good player without a role? I think he's got a role. He's that guy that he's a backup 4 or 5. I think in an ideal situation, he's a great team player, makes teams better when he plays, and I think that's a good thing. How good are Chris Dunn's defensive stats worth good going forward? Look, his defensive stats are good. There's no denying that. It's just that his inability to do anything offensively does limit him. But if he does get those minutes, those defensive numbers can be useful. And he's even in a 20-minute role, he's a streamable standard league guy just to get steals. Joe Buck, feels like the Wolves really need some perimeter shooting. Yes, they do. 30th in three-point attempt rate. Getting a power forward that can shoot would be ideal, but barring that, where do we make room for a shooter? Run LaVine with the bench. Well, LaVine's your only shooter in the starting lineup there. Oh, Joe, I didn't know you were a Timberwolves fan. Run LaVine with the bench. And I think that's ideally LaVine's role moving forward, and I think it probably will be this season as he recovers from that ACL. And yes, it's going to be getting a power forward that can shoot, whether that is someone like Tatum or Isaac that comes in and runs that position. I think that is what they'll look to do and get that shooting for. Eric Lapointe, I like Gorgie Dieng. He really stuffs the stat sheet when he plays, but the minutes and usage have been concerning. Should I continue to invest? I wouldn't worry too much about the usage. That's not where Gorgie Dieng's value comes from. You should continue to invest, but as I said earlier, I would expect maybe 2 more seasons of fantasy usefulness from Gorgie Dieng, and then it will drop away. So that's sort of where I look at him. And David Laliberte says, again about Dieng, I really like Dieng, but believe he is a center like Towns. I'd agree with that. I'd like them to go after Mirotic this offseason and have Dieng as a backup 4-5. If they had Mirotic, I think that would be absolutely superb and Mirotic would flourish. And yes, I agree now if they don't bring in someone like Isaac or Tatum. But yes, that would be the perfect situation for them to get a player like Nikola Mirotic as their power forward, stretch forward. He would, I think he'd crush it in Minnesota. Kale Allen, keep Rubio or Dunn long term? You know my answer to that. It's Rubio. And will they trade one out for an asset sooner than we think? You have to get an asset back. Can you get an asset for Chris Dunn after that rookie campaign? A very, very poor asset. So in general, I think you'd be better off keeping him. John Orban says, is Monk the best fit in the draft? No. As I said, I think getting that stretch 4, an Isaac, a Tatum, one of those sort of guys, is going to be the best option for the Minnesota Timberwolves. All right. That is it for today's show. Make sure you are subscribed on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, on TuneIn to make sure you never miss an episode. There are going to be 2 episodes today, so you get double the dose of information, or hopefully information as well. We'll be back with the New York Knicks show later on. Don't forget to check out basketballmonster.com for next season for all our rankings and projections and tools and all that sort of stuff. And of course, the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Karl-Anthony Towns.